course of our last few lessons, we learned how different sections of people in the Indian subcontinent interpreted the non-cooperation movement in their own ways. And they came up with their own ideas, their own responses which suited their imperatives, which suited their convenience. And in this way, the non-cooperation movement took a turn which was not favorable and desirable to Mahatma Gandhi, which is why he called off the non-cooperation movement in 1922. Now, this was a major national movement that brought together many people from different parts of the subcontinent. The Muslims and the Hindus were united. They together fought against the British colonial rule. But after the calling off of the non-cooperation movement, the Indian subcontinent was further enmeshed in even more conflicts and disputes between the various classes and groups of people. No one was sure which way to follow, which path to take in order to fight the Britishers away from the Indian subcontinent. Now, in the year 1928, at an all-party conference that included members from different Indian parties, a new committee was constituted under the leadership of Motilal Nehru. Now, this committee was to draft a constitution for the Indian subcontinent, and Motilal Nehru headed this committee that drafted the Nehru Report. Now, what did this Nehru Report propose? Nehru Report proposed dominion status for India. That is to say, the Nehru Report proposed or looked forward to making India a self-governed colony under British imperial rule. This is what we understand by a dominion status for India, which was proposed by the Nehru Report in 1928. Now, when this idea for dominion status for India was proposed, the then Viceroy, Lord Irwin, was looking for ways to appease and appeal to the Indian masses. So, initially, Lord Irwin extended an offer of dominion status for India. But when this offer was extended to the masses in the Indian subcontinent, there was a huge uproar in Britain. Now, the Britishers were in no way willing to let the Indians have their autonomy, to let the Indians stay in a self-governed colony, which is why under mass pressure from Britain, now Lord Irwin walked back on his words. And he said that dominion status would not be granted to India immediately. It would be granted at an unpredictable future. No one knew when this dominion status would be granted to India. So, Lord Irwin extended a vague offer of granting India dominion status in an unspecified future. Now, Lord Irwin also called the Indian leaders to join a round table conference for discussing this dominion status. But the Indian National Congress was not to be placated with this idea of dominion status which would be granted to India at an unspecified future. No one knew when Lord Irwin would give India dominion status, and in fact no one knew if this dominion status would ever be granted to the Indians. And so the Indian National Congress was not at all satisfied. The Congress leaders were very much dissatisfied when this idea of dominion status was almost turned down by the Britishers. Now, during this time, the young radicals within the Indian National Congress were no longer holding any faith in this idea of dominion status. So, these young radicals like Subhash Chandra Bose, Jawaharlal Nehru completely overshadowed the moderates and the liberals who were looking for a middle ground. And so, these young radicals now declared the Purna Swaraj. So, the declaration of Purna Swaraj, which literally means complete independence was made in the Lahore session of Congress on December 19, 1929 under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru. So these radicals did not put any faith in getting dominion status, because dominion status did not mean complete independence. They would remain a self-governed colony but very much under the British colonial rule. But what these people like Jawaharlal Nehru or Subhash Chandra Bose wanted was complete independence or Purna Swaraj from the colonial rule. Before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. When was the Purna Swaraj declaration made by the Indian National Congress? Was it made on April 10, 1929, December 13, 1929, December 19, 1929 or on December 19, 1928? Well, the correct answer is December 19, 1929. It was in this Congress session at Lahore on December 19, 1929 that the Purna Swaraj or Complete Independence Declaration was made under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru. Along with this Purna Swaraj Declaration, Jawaharlal Nehru also announced that January 26, 1930 was to be celebrated as the Independence Day of India. But you must be questioning that we know that India got its independence on August 15, 1947 from the British colonial rule. Well, at this point of time, after the Purna Swaraj resolution was made, the Congress leaders under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru now declared that January 26, 1930 should be declared and celebrated as the Independence Day. Though India did not get independence on January 26, you should know that this one day, that is January 26, continued to remain very important in Indian politics, because when the constitution makers much later on in 1949 had finished drafting the Constitution of India, they waited till the January 26 of 1950 in order to celebrate that day as the Republic Day of India, and so nostalgia was associated with this date, January 26, and this January 26, 1930 now became very important in the pages of history, because it was for the first time that this Purna Swaraj Declaration was made and Independence Day of India was to be celebrated by the Indian masses, though they were very much under the impact of colonial rule. Now, at this point of time, Mahatma Gandhi was very skeptical of Lord Irwin's motives, because he knew that Lord Irwin was not very intent on granting dominion status or complete independence to the Indian masses. And so, on January 31, 1930, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a letter to Lord Irwin, and in this letter, he generally talked about the larger interests of the country, of how the country would get independence, and at the same time he also took into consideration the interests and the demands of various sections and classes of the Indian societies, so that they could also be included in this entire process. Now, Mahatma Gandhi mentioned that if the government and Lord Irwin did not accept his 11 demands that were stated in this letter, he would now launch a civil disobedience movement. Now, Lord Irwin was already pressurized by Britain, because Britain did not want to give India dominion status or complete independence. India was to be completely subjugated and controlled by the Britishers in every possible way, and this is what the British Crown was of the opinion. And so these ideas of dominion status or even complete independence did not gain any currency among the Britishers, and so they were not very willing to extend these offers to the Indian masses. When Gandhi's proposal was rejected by Lord Irwin, Gandhi now gave a mass call and he started the civil disobedience movement in March 1930. So with this, Gandhi now launched another national movement, and this was even more greater in impact. This was even a much larger scale movement than the non-cooperation movement. So let us now learn how Mahatma Gandhi began this civil disobedience movement. Mahatma Gandhi knew that this abstract idea of dominion status or complete independence will not appeal much to the masses. The masses needed something with which they could relate. And so, certain things which were of importance to the masses had to be taken into consideration by Mahatma Gandhi. And so, what he decided to focus on was salt. Now, salt is a commodity that the Indian masses used and still use, and it's used all over the world. Now, be that the poorer lot or even the richer lot, everyone in the Indian subcontinent used salt. They needed salt for preparing food for their everyday consumption. Now, in the year 1835, the British had imposed a salt tax. And at the same time, they also passed a series of salt laws. And these salt laws forbade the Indians from collecting, producing or selling salt. So something just as basic and necessary like salt was not allowed to be collected, produced or even sold by the Indians. And the Indians also found it very difficult when they had to pay taxes for buying salt, because salt is something that they required for their consumption. And so Mahatma Gandhi knew it very well that if he could use this salt as a symbol of this entire civil disobedience movement, then he could reach out to a larger proportion of masses. So Mahatma Gandhi began this civil disobedience movement with the famous Salt March, which is also known as the Dandi March. What was this Dandi March all about? Now, Gandhi along with his 78 followers now undertook a march from the Sabarmati ashram at Ahmedabad to Dandi. So here you could locate the places Ahmedabad and Dandi, which are located in the present day Indian state of Gujarat. So this was a 240 miles long journey from Ahmedabad to Dandi, and Gandhi undertook this journey with his 78 followers. Now this journey, which is also known as the Dandi March, started on March 12, 1930 and it ended on April 6, 1930. So this 240-mile long walk was completed between this period. And after Gandhi and his followers arrived at Dandi on April 6, 1930, they now defied the British salt laws by manufacturing salt. So Dandi, as you can see here, is located very close to the Arabian Sea. So saline water was obtained from the Arabian Sea, from which then salt was obtained by evaporating the water. And in this way, when Gandhi and his followers reached Dandi, they now manufactured salt, and this was a very strong blow to the British government because they completely defied the British salt laws. In accordance with the British salt laws, the Indians were not allowed to collect or even make or sell salt, but Gandhi and his followers were doing the same. And this is how the civil disobedience movement began in 1930. Now, salt marches kept on happening throughout the Indian subcontinent because many people were inspired by Gandhi's famous Dandi March. Now, in the southern part of the subcontinent, C. Rajagopalachari organized a salt march in Tamil Nadu from Trichinopoly to Vedaranyam. So here you could look at the places where this salt march happened under the leadership of C. Rajagopalachari. So many such salt marches kept on happening as a form of protest against the British salt laws and as a form of showing solidarity with this civil disobedience movement. Now, this civil disobedience movement was even more widespread than the non-cooperation movement. Because in the non-cooperation movement, we learned that the Indians were called upon to boycott foreign goods, to boycott government colleges, schools and other institutions. And along with that, in the civil disobedience movement, people were encouraged to picket shops selling foreign goods and liquor. So it was not just boycotting, but this time it was picketing of shops that sold foreign goods and liquor. At the same time, public bonfires were also arranged where the masses gathered and burnt all their British clothes. So these were expressions of the anger, the hatred that the masses had against the Britishers. And all kind of foreign goods, foreign products were seen as absolutely negative by the Indian masses, because these were the ways, these were the tools rather, through which the Indians were colonized and exploited. And so these were burnt in public bonfires. And like what happened during the non-cooperation movement, during the civil disobedience movement as well, many people resigned from their government jobs and they also refused to pay taxes to the government. So the people were in complete defiance of the colonial government in every possible way. Likewise, in the northwest frontier province, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan and his group called the Khudai Khidmatgar stopped paying taxes. So they were no longer paying taxes which were arbitrarily imposed upon the Indians by the British colonial government. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was a staunch believer and supporter of Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent ideals, and because of his commitment to non-violence, he was given the title Frontier Gandhi. The civil disobedience movement entailed widespread support and expressions of protest from all the sections of the Indian society, so to speak. Even the forest people also violated the forest laws and entered the reserved forests to collect wood and graze cattle. Now, the reserved forests were places where the tribals or the local indigenous people were not allowed to enter. But now they completely threw all caution to wind. The floodgates had opened and they were in complete defiance of all kinds of laws, and by violating the forest laws, tribal people also started entering the reserved forests, which were the places that they inhabited for many centuries. The civil disobedience movement has been crucial in the pages of history for another very important reason. This is because for the first time, women participated in large numbers in a national movement. In fact, if you look at this image closely, you will be able to see many women who are very much a part of this long march. So many women were a part of this civil disobedience movement. In fact, when Gandhi undertook the Dandi March, there were many women followers who also undertook this march with him. So it saw participation from women, participation from tribal people, participation from different sections of the society. Now, during this time, women were participating in protest marches, they manufactured salt, Because just a while ago, this point was mentioned that many women undertook the Dandi march, and upon reaching Dandi, these women manufactured salt. They also picketed foreign cloth and liquor shops. So this was a full-fledged participation from women in a national movement. In fact, very brave women leaders were now considering it their responsibility to fight for their nation's cause. In fact, they did not even flinch to go to the jail for their nation's cause. So they were no longer restricted or relegated to the domestic sphere. They came out on the streets and served their nation. So women like Sarojini Naidu, Kamala Nehru or Vijayalakshmi Pandit came on the streets to fight against the colonial rule. They braved police repression, they braved lathi charge, they braved mob firings, and this is how these women have survived very bravely in the pages of history. Now, having talked about the mass participation in civil disobedience movement, here we will be taking up a new line of discussion. In our lesson on the non-cooperation movement, we saw how different sections of the society interpreted the Gandhian ideal of non-cooperation in their own ways to suit their immediate needs. Likewise, during the civil disobedience movement as well, different sections of the people interpreted the ideas of this movement in their own ways, because they were actually looking at their own local and immediate needs. So, different social groups joined the civil disobedience movement with different ideals and with their own interpretations of Swaraj. Firstly, we begin with the rich peasant communities like the Patidars of Gujarat and the Jats of Uttar Pradesh. Now, these were rich peasant communities and they earned a lot during the colonial rule. And so, when these people were now having to pay more and more taxes and cesses to the government, they found it very difficult to do so. And they were also filled with anger, as in why would they pay increased taxes to the government? So, the fight for Swaraj in their case was a struggle against high revenues. They were reluctant to pay high revenues and taxes to the government. Now, hard hit by the trade depression as well as the falling prices, it became difficult for these rich peasants to pay the government's revenue demand. So, Swaraj for them was not complete independence from colonial rule. What they wanted to achieve was a freedom from paying high revenues. So, can you understand how this group of people interpreted Swaraj in a very different way from what was seen by Mahatma Gandhi? Likewise, we also have the poorer peasants. Now, along with wanting a relaxation in the high revenue, these poorer peasants also wanted their unpaid rent to the landlord to be remitted. Now, these were people who did not possess any land of their own, and they had to work on the lands which were owned by wealthy zamindars and landlords, and they had to pay very high taxes for the same. So, along with a relaxation in the revenue which was to be paid to the British colonial government, these poor peasants also wanted a remittance in the rent which they had to pay to the landlords. Now, these poor peasants often joined the socialist and the communist movements because they were belonging to the lowest rungs of the society. They more often than not did not find good representation within the Indian National Congress. And the Congress leaders also did not take up their demands very often because the Congress leaders were afraid of the repercussion this would happen. The Congress leaders relied a lot upon the wealthy landowners, and so if these poor peasants' interests were taken into account, then the Congress could end up in clashes with the wealthy landowning sections. And so the relationship between the Congress and these poor peasants remained uncertain and unfathomable. It was not very clear whether Congress was really in support of their movements. Last but not the least, we also have the businessmen. Well, you might be thinking that it were only the poor peasants or even the landlords who were hit by the British colonial government, who were hit by the economic depression in the subcontinent. Well, the businessmen were also affected in this process. How is it so? Now, during the years of the First World War, Indian business flourished to a great extent, because the British industries and factories were busy producing goods which were required by the army to fight in the First World War. And in India, many iron and steel plants, many mills kept on producing more and more goods which were not just used by the Indians but also sold off to England. And so these businessmen kept on thriving during the years of the First World War. And because of this reason, when the colonial government imposed taxes and restrictions on them, they also started joining the civil disobedience movement. Because they wanted to trade freely, they wanted to perform business activities freely without any constraints. Now, these businessmen also provided financial assistance to the movement, which is why the Congress was always in support of these rich businessmen. And at the same time, these rich businessmen also demanded that a proper ratio should be maintained between the sterling euro and the Indian rupee so as to control or curb the import of foreign goods. And they wanted to ensure that they all refused to buy or sell any imported goods. So they were trying to help their own industries thrive, and they were trying to stop import of foreign goods. Now, during this time, to organize business interests, businessmen had already formed the Indian Industrial and Commercial Congress in 1920 and the Federation of the Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries in 1927. Now, very wealthy and popular industrialists and businessmen like Purushottam Das Thakurdas or J.D. Birla played a very crucial role in organizing the business interests and in turn affecting and shaping Indian politics to a certain extent. With this, we come to an end of our discussion on the civil disobedience movement. We learned that the civil disobedience movement was launched because Lord Irwin did not accept Gandhi's proposal, which were given in the form of 11 demands. India was not granted dominion status, and complete independence or Purna Swaraj was too far away. And the Indian leaders were no longer willing to remain silent, and so Mahatma Gandhi launched the civil disobedience movement. In this civil disobedience movement, the most important event would be the Dandi March of 1930, and it was the beginning point of the civil disobedience movement. Subsequently, we also talked about how different sections of the society came up with their own interpretations of this idea of Swaraj and the civil disobedience movement. In our subsequent lesson, we will learn about how the colonial government responded to this new civil disobedience movement and how certain pacts were signed between the Indian Congress leaders and the British colonial officials. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million-plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.